The heart monitor screamed before Damiano Rossi's eyes even opened. Nurses rushed into the room, shoes slapping against the cold floor, voices sharp with urgency. A doctor pushed through the small crowd gathering at the door, his hands already reaching for the chart hanging at the foot of the bed. For 8 months, this room had been silent, except for the steady beep of machines and the quiet breathing of a man the world believed might never wake again. Now every wire attached to his body trembled with sudden movement. Damiano's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the harsh white light above him. His throat was dry, his limbs heavy, as though his own body had become a stranger to him. He tried to lift his hand and failed. He tried to speak and only managed a hoarse whisper. The doctor leaned closer, checking his pupils, calling his name, asking him to squeeze his fingers if he could hear. Damiano squeezed. A wave of relief passed through the room. Someone by the door made a phone call, their voice hushed but urgent, informing someone important that the boss had opened his eyes. Within minutes, the hallway outside filled with the sound of hurried footsteps. Men in dark suits, the kind who carried themselves like soldiers even in a hospital corridor, took their positions outside the door. Word was already spreading through the family that Damiano Rossi, the man everyone had quietly begun to fear was gone forever, was awake. His mother arrived first. Contessa Rossi swept into the room with the same commanding presence she carried into every space. But the moment her eyes landed on her son, sitting upright for the first time in 8 months, her composure cracked. She rushed to his bedside, taking his weak hand into both of hers, tears sliding down cheeks that rarely allowed themselves such softness. "Damiano," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My son, you came back to us." He tried to speak, but his voice failed again. The doctor offered him water, and he drank slowly, each swallow an effort. When he finally found his voice, it was barely above a breath, but the single word that left his lips echoed through the room louder than any shout could have. "Elena." Silence fell instantly. The doctor paused his examination. The nurse checking his blood pressure froze mid-motion. Contessa Rossi's grip on her son's hand tightened, her tears drying as quickly as they had come, replaced by something colder, more guarded. "Who is Elena?" The doctor asked gently, assuming perhaps it was confusion, a side effect of the long sleep, a name pulled from a dream. But Contessa Rossi knew exactly who Elena was. Her jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, something like fear flickered behind her eyes before she masked it with a practiced smile. "He is confused," she said quickly. "It happens after this long. The mind plays tricks." Damiano did not argue, because he could not. His body was too weak, his mind too foggy, the effort of speaking already draining what little strength he had gathered. But even as exhaustion pulled him back toward sleep, one image stayed sharp and clear behind his closing eyes. A woman's face, soft brown eyes filled with quiet determination, hands pressed firmly against his chest, warm despite the chaos around them. A voice, steady and calm, telling him to stay, to fight, to not let go. He did not know why her face was the first thing his mind reached for after 8 months of darkness. He only knew that it mattered more than anything else in that hospital room. Over the following days, Damiano's body slowly began to remember how to function. He learned to sit without support, to hold a spoon without his hand shaking too badly, to walk a few steps with the help of a nurse on each side. Every small victory was met with relief from his family, who visited constantly, filling his room with flowers, updates about the business, and careful reassurances that everything had been handled in his absence. But no matter how many people surrounded him, Damiano felt a strange hollowness, as if something essential was missing from the room. He would catch himself glancing toward the door every time it opened, expecting someone who never appeared. He would close his eyes at night and see fragments of memory that made no sense to him, yet felt more real than anything happening around him now. A warehouse, gunfire, pain exploding through his chest, and then her. He remembered her voice most clearly. Calm, steady, refusing to let panic control her even as chaos surrounded them both. He remembered the pressure of her hands against his wound, the warmth of her breath as she leaned close and told him to keep his eyes open, to look at her, to stay with her. He remembered thinking, even as darkness closed in around him, that he did not want to lose the sight of her face. But when he asked about her, the answers he received were always vague, always deflecting, always steering him back toward safer topics. His mother spoke instead about Vittoria, the woman Damiano had been engaged to before the shooting, reminding him gently that she had waited faithfully throughout his recovery and was eager to see him again. His consigliere, Enzo, spoke about business matters that required his attention, about rivals who might sense weakness now that the family's leadership had been in question for months. Everyone around him seemed determined to fill the silence with anything except the one name he actually wanted answered. It only made him more certain that something was being hidden from him. On the 5th day since waking, a young nurse named Grace came to check his vitals during the evening shift. She was newer to the hospital, less familiar with the unspoken rules surrounding the Rossi family and their visits, less careful with her words than the staff who had worked this floor for years. "You're lucky to be awake," she said, adjusting the machine beside his bed. "Most people who go under for that long don't make it back at all. The last nurse who worked your case used to say you were fighting harder than anyone she'd seen." Damiano's attention sharpened immediately. "The last nurse?" Grace nodded, unaware of the tension suddenly filling the room. "Elena, I think her name was. She was here almost every day for the first couple of months. Really dedicated. Then one day she just stopped coming. New nurse took over after that." Damiano's heart pounded against his ribs, each beat sending a jolt of certainty through him. Elena was real. She had been here, by his side, for months. And then she had vanished, just as suddenly as she had appeared in his fragmented memories. "Do you know why she left?" he asked, keeping his voice as steady as he could manage. Grace hesitated, sensing perhaps that she had already said more than she should have. "I'm not sure. There were some rumors, but I really don't know the details. I'm sorry. I should get back to my rounds." She left quickly, leaving Damiano alone with his racing thoughts. He stared at the ceiling, piecing together fragments of memory and fact, growing more convinced with each passing minute that Elena's disappearance was not a coincidence. Someone had made her leave, and he intended to find out who and why. That night, when Contessa Rossi came for her usual evening visit, Damiano was ready for her. "Tell me about Elena," he said, the moment she sat down beside his bed. The truth this time. His mother's expression shifted, the warmth she usually reserved for him replaced by careful calculation. "Damiano, you need to focus on your recovery. The past few months are complicated, and there will be time to sort through everything once you're stronger. I am asking now." The firmness in his voice surprised even him. 8 months of silence had stripped away his patience for evasive answers. He had spent nearly a year trapped inside his own mind, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except listen to the world happen around him without him. He was done being handled gently. Contessa Rossi studied her son for a long moment, weighing her next words carefully. "She was your nurse. A good one, from what I understand. But there were concerns about her conduct, about boundaries that were crossed during a vulnerable time. It was decided that it would be best for everyone if she was no longer part of your care." "Decided by whom?" "By people who have only ever wanted to protect you," his mother said, her tone sharpening slightly. Damiano watched her closely, noting the careful way she avoided his eyes, the tightness in her shoulders that betrayed more than her words did. He had spent his entire life reading people, learning to see past the things they said to the truths they were trying to hide. His mother was hiding something now, and the realization sat heavy in his chest. "I remember her," he said quietly. "I remember the warehouse. I remember her hands on my chest, keeping me alive until help arrived." That does not sound like someone who crossed boundaries. That sounds like someone who saved my life. For a brief moment, something like guilt flickered across his mother's face before she composed herself again. You were badly injured, Damiano. Confused. The mind creates stories to make sense of trauma. I only want what is best for you. And right now, what is best is rest. Vittoria has been asking to see you. She has been so patient through all of this. Damiano let the subject drop, but only on the surface. Beneath his calm exterior, his mind was already working, already planning. He was still too weak to leave the hospital, still dependent on machines and medication and the careful watch of doctors who monitored every fluctuation in his condition. But weakness of the body did not mean weakness of will, and Damiano Rossi had never been a man who accepted being told what he could or could not know. The following morning, he asked to speak with Salvatore, his most trusted enforcer and one of the few men whose loyalty had never once wavered, even during the long months when Damiano's survival was uncertain. Salvatore arrived within the hour, his broad frame filling the doorway, his expression carefully neutral in the way of a man trained to reveal nothing unless necessary. You look better, Salvatore said, taking a seat beside the bed. Stronger than I expected. I need you to find someone for me, Damiano said, skipping past pleasantries. A woman named Elena. She worked here as my nurse during the first months after the shooting. She left suddenly, and no one will tell me why. Something shifted in Salvatore's expression, quick and subtle, but Damiano caught it. Recognition. Salvatore knew something. You remember her, Salvatore said carefully. I remember everything that matters, Damiano replied. I remember the warehouse. I remember her keeping me alive. I remember waking up and saying her name before I said anything else. That is not a coincidence, and I am done being told it is confusion. Salvatore was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to say. Finally, he leaned forward, lowering his voice even though the room was empty, except for the two of them. There were things happening while you were under, Damiano. Decisions made by people who believed they were protecting the family, protecting your position. I do not know everything, but I know enough to say that Elena did not simply choose to leave on her own. Damiano's jaw tightened, anger flaring hot beneath his ribs, despite the exhaustion still weighing down his body. Find her. Whatever it takes. I want to know where she is, and I want to know exactly what happened. Salvatore nodded once, understanding the weight of the request and the danger it carried. In their world, questioning decisions made by the family, especially decisions made by Contessa Rossi herself, was never simple. But Salvatore had followed Damiano long enough to know that once his mind was set on something, there was no changing his course. I will find her, Salvatore promised. Give me a few days. As Salvatore left the room, Damiano leaned back against his pillows, staring at the ceiling while his heart continued its steady, determined rhythm. 8 months of silence had taken so much from him, time he could never reclaim, moments he had missed, a body that would take months more to fully recover. But it had also given him something unexpected: clarity. He knew what mattered to him now in a way he had never allowed himself to admit before the shooting. Somewhere in this city, a woman who had fought to keep him alive was living without him, perhaps believing he did not remember her at all, perhaps believing whatever lie had been used to send her away. He did not know the full truth yet, but he knew this much with absolute certainty. He was not going to let her disappear from his life a second time. Outside his hospital room, unaware of the storm quietly building within its walls, the city moved forward with its usual noise and rhythm, indifferent to the man slowly gathering his strength, and to the secret his family had worked so hard to bury. But secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, rarely stayed buried forever. And Damiano Rossi, even weakened and recovering, was not a man who let go of what he wanted once he remembered it existed. Somewhere across the city, in a small apartment far removed from the world of danger and power that defined the Rossi name, Elena Marchetti had no idea that the man she had spent 2 months fighting to keep alive had just opened his eyes and spoken her name before anyone else's. She had convinced herself, over the long months of silence, that he would never remember her at all. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Elena Marchetti had just finished a 12-hour shift at Grace Memorial Hospital, a smaller facility on the east side of the city, when her phone buzzed with a message from a coworker asking if she had heard the news. She had not. She had spent the entire day moving between patients, checking charts, and trying not to think about the man she had left behind months earlier, the man whose face still visited her in quiet, unguarded moments. She opened the message expecting gossip about hospital politics or a scheduling change. Instead, she found a single line that made her stop walking in the middle of the hospital parking lot. Damiano Rossi woke up. He's talking. He's going to recover. Elena stared at the screen for a long moment, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She read the message again, as if the words might change the second time. They did not. Damiano was awake. After 8 months of silence, after the doctors had quietly begun preparing his family for the possibility that he might never regain consciousness, he had opened his eyes. She should have felt relief. She did feel relief, an overwhelming, dizzying wave of it that nearly buckled her knees right there in the parking lot. But beneath the relief was something sharper, something that twisted painfully in her chest. Fear. Because if Damiano was awake, if he was talking, there was a chance he remembered things she had spent months trying to convince herself did not matter anymore. There was a chance he remembered her. Elena forced herself to keep walking to her car, her hands trembling slightly as she unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. She sat there for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel, staring blankly through the windshield, while her mind raced through memories she had tried so hard to bury. She remembered the first time she had been assigned to his care, walking into a private hospital room guarded by men who looked more suited to a battlefield than a hospital hallway. She remembered being told, in no uncertain terms, that her job was simply to monitor his condition and report any changes, nothing more. She remembered how quickly that simple assignment had become something far more complicated. Damiano Rossi, even unconscious, even fighting for his life, had an unshakable presence about him. Elena found herself talking to him during quiet hours, reading aloud from books she brought from home, telling him about her day as though he could hear every word. She told herself it was simply good practice, that speaking to unconscious patients sometimes helped with recovery. But somewhere in those long months, it had become something else entirely. She remembered the night his condition worsened, machines blaring warnings, doctors rushing into the room while she stayed by his side, refusing to leave even when told to step back. She remembered holding his hand through the crisis, whispering for him to stay, to fight, to not give up, and she remembered, weeks later, the quiet moment when his fingers had twitched against hers, the faintest sign of response that made her believe, for the first time, that he might actually survive. That was the night everything changed. That was the night Contessa Rossi walked into the room unannounced and found Elena leaning close to her son's bed, her hand resting gently against his cheek, tears streaming down her face after weeks of exhaustion and fear finally breaking through her professional composure. Elena would never forget the look on Contessa Rossi's face. Cold, calculating, furious in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with control. 2 days later, Elena was removed from Damiano's case and quietly transferred out of the hospital entirely. She was told in a private meeting with hospital administration and a man she did not recognize, but who clearly held significant influence, that her services were no longer needed. She was offered a generous sum of money to relocate and a clear, unspoken warning that questioning the decision would not end well for her. She had taken the money, not because she wanted it, but because she understood the kind of power she was dealing with. She had left without saying goodbye to a man who could not hear her anyway, carrying with her a secret that made the entire situation far more complicated than anyone in that room had realized. Now, sitting in her car in a hospital parking lot months later, Elena pressed a hand against her stomach, an old habit she had developed without realizing it, and closed her eyes against the memory that still felt too raw to fully accept. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the same coworker, this one carrying a different kind of weight. They're saying his first words when he woke up were someone's name. Elena, isn't that your name? Elena's blood ran cold. She stared at the message, reading it over and over, her mind refusing to fully process what it meant. Damiano had said her name. After 8 months of silence, after everything that had happened, the first word out of his mouth had been hers. She did not respond to the message. She could not find the words. Instead, she started her car and drove home in a daze, her mind spinning through possibilities she had spent months forcing herself not to consider. What did it mean that he remembered her? Did he remember everything, or only fragments? Did he know what his family had done to push her away? And more terrifying than any of those questions, did he know about the secret she had carried away with her that final night? The one thing that had made her decision to disappear feel less like cowardice and more like necessity. Elena's apartment was small but comfortable, tucked into a quiet neighborhood far removed from the parts of the city controlled by families like the Rossis. She had built a careful, ordinary life here over the past several months, working steady hospital shifts, keeping to herself, avoiding any connection that might draw unwanted attention. It was not the life she had imagined for herself before everything happened, but it was safe, predictable, manageable. She sat down on her small couch, still wearing her scrubs from her shift, and allowed herself, for the first time in months, to fully remember the man who had occupied so much of her heart, despite never once opening his eyes in her presence. Damiano Rossi was not a good man by any conventional measure. Elena knew that. She had heard the whispers among hospital staff, the careful way people spoke around his name, the fear that seemed to follow the Rossi family wherever they went. She knew what kind of business kept his family in power, knew the danger that came with being associated with someone like him. But she had also seen a different side of him during those long months, a side that no one else seemed to know existed. She had seen the scars on his body that told stories of a difficult childhood, had found old photographs tucked into a bag his mother brought to the hospital, pictures of a young boy who looked lost and lonely despite the wealth surrounding him. She had spoken to him during his unconscious months about things that had nothing to do with business or power, simple things, hopeful things, and somewhere in that one-sided conversation, she had fallen for a man she barely knew and might never truly have. Her phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and did not recognize the number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer instead. Elena Marchetti? A deep, unfamiliar voice asked. Her stomach tightened immediately. Who is this? My name is Salvatore. I work for Damiano Rossi. There was a brief pause, as though the man on the other end was choosing his words carefully. He is asking for you. He remembers what happened, and he wants to know why you left. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes, gripping the phone tightly, feeling the careful, ordinary life she had built over the past several months beginning to crack around the edges. I can't, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, tell him I'm sorry, but I can't. He's not going to stop looking for you, Salvatore said, his tone not unkind but firm. I have found you once already. It will not take long to find you again if he asks. I think you should consider speaking with him directly, on your own terms, before that happens. Elena sat in silence for a long moment after the call ended, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every risk, every fear that had driven her away in the first place. Contessa Rossi's threats had been clear and specific. Stay away from her son, take the money, disappear, and no harm would come to her. Elena had believed those threats were serious enough to reshape her entire life around them. But now Damiano was awake, asking for her by name, remembering the truth of what had happened between them, despite everyone's efforts to bury it. And Elena understood, with a sinking feeling in her chest. that her carefully rebuilt life was about to be pulled apart, no matter what choice she made next. She thought again of the secret she carried, the one thing that connected her to Damiano Rossi, in a way that could never be undone, no matter how far she ran or how long she stayed silent. She placed her hand against her stomach again, feeling the small, undeniable truth that had grown there over the past several months, a truth Damiano did not yet know and Contessa Rossi had made very clear should never reach him. Elena Marchetti had left the hospital that final night, carrying more than just memories of a man she had fallen for while he slept. She had left carrying his child, a secret so dangerous within the world of the Rossi family that she had chosen exile over the risk of anyone discovering it. And now, with Damiano awake and asking for her by name, that secret felt more impossible to keep hidden than ever before. 3 days passed before Elena found the courage to answer Salvatore's call again. 3 days of restless nights, of standing in front of her bathroom mirror trying to decide what to do, of nearly packing a bag to run somewhere farther away, somewhere no one connected to the Rossi family could ever find her. But each time she reached for her suitcase, something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion from running. Maybe it was the memory of Damiano's voice, faint and hoarse as she imagined him saying her name for the first time in 8 months. Maybe it was the small, growing truth she carried that deserved more than a lifetime of hiding. When she finally called Salvatore back, her voice was steady, though her hands shook as she held the phone. "I'll talk to him," she said, "but not at the hospital, somewhere private. And I need your word that nothing happens to me because of this conversation." "You have my word," Salvatore replied. "Damiano only wants answers, nothing more." Meanwhile, inside his hospital room, Damiano's recovery continued at a pace that surprised even his doctors. Determination pushed him through physical therapy sessions that left him exhausted and trembling, but each day he grew a little stronger, walked a little farther, remembered a little more. The fragments of memory that had once felt disconnected and confusing began forming into something whole, something undeniable. He remembered Elena's laugh, quiet and genuine, drifting through the fog of his unconscious mind during nights when pain made sleep nearly impossible. He remembered her voice reading aloud from a worn paperback novel, her tone calm and steady even as machines beeped warnings around them. He remembered more than anything the desperate strength in her hands as she fought to keep him alive during those first chaotic moments after the shooting, refusing to let him slip away even as blood soaked through her uniform. None of that sounded like a woman who had crossed professional boundaries. It sounded like a woman who had cared, deeply and completely, about a man she had no obligation to care about at all. His mother visited less frequently now, her usual warmth replaced by a careful distance that only deepened Damiano's suspicion. Vittoria visited more often, dressed elegantly, speaking softly about their future together, about wedding plans that had been paused but not forgotten. Damiano listened politely, offered no promises, and felt nothing beyond a distant, hollow obligation whenever she spoke of their engagement. He confronted his mother directly on the 6th day since waking, catching her during a quiet afternoon visit when Vittoria was not present and the room held only the two of them. "I know what happened," he said simply. "I know Elena was paid to disappear. I know you were the one who arranged it." Contessa Rossi's expression hardened instantly, any pretense of confusion or gentle deflection abandoned. "I did what was necessary to protect this family." "Protect it from what?" "From a woman who saved my life." "From a scandal," his mother snapped, her composure finally cracking under the weight of his persistence. "You were engaged to Vittoria. Her family holds significant influence within our world. Influence we need now more than ever, with rivals circling while you were unconscious. A relationship with your nurse, a woman with no standing, no family connections, no protection, would have destroyed everything we have worked to build. So you threatened her. I offered her a generous settlement and asked her to leave quietly. She accepted." "You gave her no choice," Damiano said, his voice low and dangerous. carrying the weight of authority that even his own mother could not fully ignore. And you did it while I was lying in that bed, unable to speak for myself, unable to protect the one person who fought harder than anyone to keep me alive. Contessa Rossi's eyes flashed with something between anger and fear, though she quickly masked it beneath her usual composure. I am your mother, Damiano. Everything I have done has been to protect you and this family. You cannot understand the pressures we faced while you were gone, the enemies who saw weakness and began circling, the alliances that needed careful management to keep this family standing. I understand that you made a decision that was not yours to make, Damiano replied, and I intend to correct it. His mother left the room shortly after, her expression tight with barely restrained anger, but Damiano felt no guilt over the confrontation. If anything, he felt a renewed sense of clarity, a certainty that had been building since the moment he opened his eyes and spoke Elena's name without conscious thought. That evening, Salvatore arrived with news that made Damiano's heart pound with anticipation. Elena had agreed to meet him, though not at the hospital, and not until he was strong enough to travel discreetly without drawing unwanted attention. The following week brought both physical progress and mounting tension within the family. Damiano's rivals, a rising criminal organization led by a man named Victor Castellan, had grown bolder during his unconscious months, testing the boundaries of territory that had once been firmly under Rossi control. Enzo, the family's consigliere, brought updates almost daily, each one carrying a note of urgency that made it clear the family's stability depended heavily on Damiano's continued recovery and swift return to leadership. Damiano listened to these updates with careful attention, understanding the very real dangers his family faced, but his mind remained equally occupied with thoughts of Elena, with the growing certainty that whatever had happened between them during his unconscious months mattered more than anyone around him wanted to admit. Vittoria noticed his distraction. She was not a foolish woman, and though she maintained her composed, patient exterior during every visit, Damiano caught glimpses of something sharper beneath her carefully maintained calm, something that looked dangerously close to jealousy whenever Elena's name happened to arise in conversation among the staff. On the day Damiano was finally discharged from the hospital, moving with careful, deliberate steps that still betrayed the fragility of his recovering body, Contessa Rossi made one final attempt to steer him away from the path he had chosen. Vittoria has planned a small gathering to celebrate your return home, she said as they walked slowly through the hospital corridor, guards flanking them on either side. It would mean a great deal to her, and to the family's standing, if you attended. I have somewhere else to be, Damiano replied simply. His mother stopped walking, turning to face him directly. Damiano, please. I understand you are angry with me, but chasing after this woman, disrupting the arrangement with Vittoria's family, risking the alliances we depend on, especially now, with Castellan growing bolder every week, this is not the time for such distractions. She is not a distraction, Damiano said, his voice quiet but absolute. She is the reason I am standing here at all. He left the hospital that afternoon with Salvatore at his side, his body weak but his resolve unshakable, heading toward a small, quiet cafe on the edge of the city where Elena had agreed to meet him. The drive felt longer than it should have, his heart pounding with a nervous anticipation he had not felt in years, a feeling entirely foreign to a man accustomed to controlling every situation he entered. When the car finally stopped outside the cafe, Damiano sat for a moment, gathering himself, before stepping out with Salvatore's steady support. Through the window, he could see her, sitting alone at a small table near the back, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee, her expression a careful mixture of anxiety and something that looked almost like hope. Elena looked up as the door opened, and for a long moment, neither of them moved, the weight of 8 months and everything that had happened between them settling heavily into the small space separating them. Elena, Damiano said softly, his voice carrying the same quiet certainty it had held the moment he first opened his eyes and spoke her name. Her eyes filled with tears, she quickly tried to blink away, her composure wavering under the reality of seeing him standing there, alive and aware, remembering everything she had believed he would never recall. "You remember," she whispered. "I remember everything," he replied, moving slowly toward her table, each step deliberate, despite the effort it clearly cost him. "And I need to understand why you left without saying goodbye." Elena's hands trembled around her coffee cup as she considered how much to tell him, how much truth this moment could safely hold. She had rehearsed this conversation countless times over the past 3 days, imagining every possible way it might unfold. Yet now that the moment had actually arrived, every carefully prepared word abandoned her completely. "Your mother made it very clear that I was not welcome in your life," she finally said. "She offered me money to leave and made it equally clear what would happen if I refused or ever spoke about what happened between us." Damiano's jaw tightened with barely restrained anger, though he kept his voice gentle, careful not to frighten her further. "I am sorry. I did not know. I would never have allowed that to happen if I had been conscious to stop it." "I know that now," Elena said quietly, "but I did not know it then. I only knew that I had fallen for a man who might never wake up, and that his family had made it clear I had no place in his world regardless of what happened." They sat together for a long while, the cafe around them fading into background noise as they slowly untangled months of silence, fear, and unspoken truths. Damiano listened as Elena described the long nights she had spent by his side, the fear she had carried when his condition worsened, the quiet hope she had clung to even when doctors offered little reassurance. He did not yet know about the secret she still carried, the truth that made this reunion far more complicated than either of them fully understood in that quiet cafe. But as they talked, as the careful distance between them slowly began to soften into something warmer, something that felt dangerously close to the connection they had shared during his unconscious months, Damiano understood with absolute certainty that he was not going to let his family's interference define what happened between them next. Whatever danger came with choosing Elena, whatever complications arose from defying his mother's carefully constructed plans, he intended to face them head-on, just as he had once fought to survive a warehouse ambush with nothing but her voice and her hands keeping him tethered to life. Neither of them noticed the black car parked across the street, watching the cafe with careful, patient attention, reporting every detail back to someone who had far more reason to fear this reunion than Contessa Rossi ever had. The black car remained parked across the street long after Damiano and Elena left the cafe, its driver relaying details of the meeting to a man who listened with growing satisfaction from the comfort of a private office across the city. Victor Castellan leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face as he considered the information he had just received. Damiano Rossi, weakened by months of recovery, distracted by a woman his own family had tried to erase, presented an opportunity too valuable to ignore. For years, Castellan had watched the Rossi family expand their influence throughout the city, always one step behind, always searching for the crack in their armor that would allow him to finally claim the territory he believed should have belonged to him from the start. Damiano's shooting and subsequent coma had offered the first real opportunity, but the family had held firm under Contessa Rossi's careful leadership, refusing to show the weakness Castellan had hoped to exploit. Now, with Damiano awake but vulnerable, distracted by personal matters that clearly mattered more to him than the political stability of his own family, Castellan finally saw his opening. He did not yet know about the pregnancy Elena carried, the secret that would have made this situation infinitely more valuable to a man like him. He only knew that Damiano's affection for this woman ran deep enough to defy his family's wishes, deep enough to become a genuine vulnerability. And vulnerabilities, in Castellan's experience, were meant to be exploited. Unaware of the danger quietly gathering around them, Damiano and Elena began meeting regularly over the following weeks, their conversations growing more open, more honest, as the careful walls each of them had built slowly began to soften. Damiano continued his physical recovery with renewed determination, pushing through difficult therapy sessions with a focus that surprised even his doctors, driven by a desire to reclaim not just his strength, but his life. Elena, despite her lingering fears about the danger surrounding Damiano's world, found herself unable to stay away, drawn back to a connection she had spent months trying to convince herself was not real. She had not yet told him about the pregnancy, uncertain how to introduce something so significant into a relationship still finding its footing after so much upheaval, uncertain whether revealing the truth would draw even greater danger toward them both. Contessa Rossi, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated by her son's continued defiance. Every attempt to redirect his attention back toward Vittoria and the political alliance their families represented was met with quiet but immovable resistance. Damiano attended family gatherings out of obligation, spoke with Vittoria with polite distance, but made no secret of where his heart truly belonged. Vittoria, for her part, watched this unfolding situation with mounting desperation. She had spent years cultivating the relationship between their families, had waited patiently through Damiano's long recovery, believing that once he woke, their engagement would resume as though nothing had changed. Watching him choose a hospital nurse over the carefully arranged future they had built together felt like watching everything she had worked toward slip through her fingers. It was during a private conversation with Contessa Rossi, held in the quiet privacy of the Rossi family estate, that Vittoria's desperation began curdling into something far more dangerous. "He cannot marry her," Vittoria said, her voice carrying an edge that had not been present during her earlier, more patient visits. "You know what this means for the family. My father will not honor our alliance if Damiano publicly humiliates me by choosing a woman with no standing over our arrangement." "I am aware of the stakes," Contessa Rossi replied coolly. "I have tried to reason with him. He is not currently receptive to reason." "Then perhaps the problem needs a different kind of solution," Vittoria said carefully, watching Contessa Rossi's reaction closely. The older woman's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "Only that Elena Marchetti seems to have a habit of disappearing when properly motivated," Vittoria replied. "Perhaps she simply needs additional motivation." Contessa Rossi did not respond immediately, her expression unreadable as she considered the implications of what Vittoria was proposing. She had already crossed one line by paying Elena to leave months earlier. The idea of going further, of allowing something more severe to unfold, sat uncomfortably even within her willingness to protect the family by any means necessary. "I will not sanction violence," Contessa Rossi finally said. "Damiano would never forgive that, and rightfully so. We need another approach." But Vittoria, driven by fear and wounded pride, had already begun considering options that extended beyond what Contessa Rossi was willing to authorize. In the days that followed, she made careful, quiet inquiries, reaching out through connections her family maintained within the city's criminal underworld, searching for a way to remove Elena from the situation permanently, without directly implicating herself or the Rossi family. Her search eventually led her, whether by careful design or simple misfortune, into contact with individuals connected to Victor Castellan's organization. Neither Vittoria nor Castellan's people initially realized the shared interest that connected them, but as careful conversations unfolded through intermediaries, both sides began recognizing the mutual benefit of an alliance neither had anticipated. Vittoria wanted Elena removed from Damiano's life. Castellan wanted an opportunity to strike at Damiano's stability, while he remained weakened by both physical recovery and personal distraction. Together, they began quietly constructing a plan that would serve both their purposes, unaware that the consequences of their alliance would extend far beyond either of their original intentions. Meanwhile, Damiano's relationship with Elena continued deepening, each day bringing them closer to a truth Elena knew she could not keep hidden much longer. She found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror one evening, hand resting against the small, barely noticeable curve of her stomach, finally accepting that the time had come to tell him. She invited him to her apartment for dinner, a simple gesture that carried enormous weight given everything unfolding around them. Damiano arrived that evening looking stronger than he had in months, his recovery progressing steadily, his presence carrying more of the quiet confidence Elena remembered from before the shooting had ever happened. They shared a simple meal together, conversation flowing easily between them in a way that had become increasingly natural over the past several weeks. But Elena's nervousness grew steadily throughout the evening, her hands trembling slightly as she cleared their plates, her mind racing through countless ways to introduce the truth she had carried alone for months. Finally, as they settled onto her small couch together, the quiet comfort of the evening settling around them, Elena took a deep breath and turned to face him directly. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice carrying a seriousness that immediately caught his attention. "Something I should have told you the moment we started seeing each other again, but I was afraid of how it might change things." Damiano's expression grew attentive, concerned. "You can tell me anything, Elena." She reached for his hand, guiding it gently to rest against her stomach, watching his face carefully as understanding slowly began to dawn in his eyes. "I'm pregnant," she said softly. "It happened during the last week before your mother had me removed from your case. I found out shortly after I left. I didn't know how to reach you, and I was afraid of what your family might do if they discovered the truth before you had a chance to remember any of this on your own." Damiano sat in stunned silence for a long moment, his hands still resting against her stomach, the weight of her words settling slowly into his understanding. A child, his child, growing within the woman who had fought so hard to keep him alive, carried in secret for months, while his own family worked to erase her from his life entirely. "How far along?" he finally asked, his voice thick with emotion he could not fully contain. "About 5 months," Elena replied. "I found out not long after I left the hospital." Damiano pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his mind racing through the implications of what she had just revealed. His mother's insistence on erasing Elena from his life had not just cost him months of connection with a woman he cared for deeply. It had nearly cost him the chance to know his own child, a truth his family had likely never even considered when they made their calculated decision to send her away. "They cannot know yet," Elena whispered against his chest, fear evident in her voice. "Not until we understand how they'll react. Your mother already tried to erase me once. I don't know what she might do if she learns about the baby before we're ready to face that conversation together." "I will protect you," Damiano said firmly, pulling back slightly to look directly into her eyes. "Both of you. Whatever it takes, whatever needs to change within my family, I am not going to let anyone push you away again." They spent the remainder of the evening discussing careful plans for how to move forward, how to navigate the complicated politics of the Rossi family while protecting both Elena and the child she carried. Neither of them yet knew about the dangerous alliance quietly forming between Vittoria and Castellan's organization, an alliance that would soon transform their careful, hopeful planning into a desperate fight for survival. As Damiano finally left Elena's apartment late that night, his mind full of possibilities for the future he now envisioned, he did not notice the same black car that had watched their first meeting parked once again down the street, its occupant relaying every detail of the evening back to people who now understood far more about the situation than either Damiano or Elena realized. The pieces were falling into place for a confrontation neither of them could yet see coming, one that would test everything Damiano had fought to reclaim since waking from his long, silent sleep. The call came in the middle of the afternoon, 3 weeks after Elena had revealed her pregnancy to Damiano, shattering what had briefly felt like a fragile, hopeful peace settling over their carefully rebuilt connection. Elena was at work, finishing a routine shift at the hospital, when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number claiming to be from hospital administration, requesting her immediate presence at a satellite clinic on the other side of the city for what they described as an urgent scheduling matter. Something about the call felt wrong from the very beginning, a slight inconsistency in the caller's knowledge of hospital procedures that Elena, with her years of experience navigating hospital bureaucracy, noticed almost immediately. But the mention of an urgent matter, combined with her general trust in the systems she had worked within for years, pushed her to dismiss her hesitation and agree to the meeting. She did not know that the call had originated not from hospital administration, but from a carefully constructed trap designed by Vittoria and her new allies within Castellan's organization. The plan, weeks in the making, had finally reached its execution, timed precisely for a moment when Damiano remained occupied with business obligations across the city, unable to accompany her or immediately notice her absence. Elena drove toward the address provided, her uneasy feeling growing stronger with each passing mile as the neighborhood shifted from familiar hospital districts into an unfamiliar industrial area she had never visited before. By the time she arrived at the address, an abandoned-looking building on the edge of a warehouse district, her instincts screamed that something was deeply wrong. She sat in her car for a long moment, considering turning back, when a man she did not recognize approached her vehicle, tapping gently on her window with a professional smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Ms. Marchetti, I'm sorry for the unusual location. There was a mix-up with the clinic address. If you'll follow me inside, we can sort out the paperwork quickly." Every instinct told Elena to drive away immediately, but before she could act on that impulse, two more men appeared from the building's entrance, effectively surrounding her car and eliminating any easy path of escape. Her heart pounded with rising terror as she realized, far too late, that she had walked directly into a trap. Meanwhile, across the city, Damiano sat in a tense meeting with Enzo and several senior members of the family's organization, discussing strategies for handling Castellan's increasingly aggressive territorial encroachments. The meeting had run longer than expected, and Damiano's phone, silenced for the discussion, sat forgotten in his jacket pocket, while three increasingly frantic messages from Elena's co-worker accumulated unanswered. It was Salvatore who finally noticed the pattern of missed calls when he checked his own phone during a brief break in the meeting, a contact within the hospital reaching out with concern about Elena's unexplained failure to arrive at a follow-up appointment she had scheduled earlier that week. "Something is wrong," Salvatore said, interrupting the meeting with an urgency that immediately drew Damiano's full attention. "Elena isn't answering her phone. Her co-worker says she left for an emergency call from administration, but the hospital has no record of any such call being made." Damiano's blood ran cold as the implications settled into understanding. He grabbed his own phone, dialing Elena's number with hands that trembled despite his efforts to remain calm. The call rang unanswered, going eventually to voicemail, confirming his worst fears. "Track her phone," he ordered Salvatore, already moving toward the door despite Enzo's concerned protests about leaving the meeting unfinished during such a critical time for family business. "Damiano, we need to finish discussing the Castellan situation," Enzo said urgently. "If we don't present a unified response soon, he will continue testing our boundaries." "Elena is missing," Damiano replied, his voice carrying an authority that ended any further argument. "Nothing matters more right now than finding her." Salvatore worked quickly, using resources within the family's network to trace the last known location of Elena's phone before its signal had gone dark, likely disabled or destroyed by whoever had taken her. The trail led toward the industrial district on the city's edge, an area Damiano immediately recognized with a sickening lurch of memory. The same warehouse district where he had nearly died 8 months earlier. The realization hit him with devastating clarity. Someone had lured Elena to the exact location of his original shooting, a choice too deliberate to be coincidence. Whoever had taken her wanted him to understand precisely what was at stake, wanted him to feel the same fear and desperation he had experienced during those chaotic, blood-soaked moments when his life had hung in the balance. "Gather the men," Damiano ordered, already moving toward his car despite his body still not fully recovered from months of physical therapy. "We go now." Inside the warehouse, Elena sat bound to a chair in a dimly lit room, her heart pounding with terror as she processed the reality of her situation. The men who had brought her inside had said little, their careful, professional demeanor somehow more frightening than open hostility would have been. She understood, with growing dread, that this was not a random act of violence but a carefully planned operation. The door opened, and Vittoria stepped into the room, her elegant composure carrying an edge Elena had never witnessed during their few previous encounters. "I am sorry it came to this," Vittoria said, though her tone carried little genuine regret. "But you should have understood, from the very beginning, that Damiano's world was never meant for someone like you." "What do you want?" Elena asked, keeping her voice as steady as possible despite the fear coursing through her. "I want my life back," Vittoria replied simply. "The life I spent years building toward, the alliance that would have secured both our families' futures. You have disrupted everything, and I am simply correcting that mistake." "And Castellan?" Elena asked, piecing together the situation despite her fear. "What does he want?" Vittoria's expression flickered with something like surprise at Elena's perceptiveness before smoothing back into careful composure. "Mr. Castellan has his own interests in this situation, interests that align conveniently with my own. Damiano will come looking for you, and when he arrives here, distracted and vulnerable, weakened both physically and emotionally, Castellan will finally have the opportunity he has waited years to claim." The full weight of the trap settled over Elena with devastating clarity. She was not just a target herself. She was bait, carefully positioned to draw Damiano into a location where his enemies could finally eliminate the threat his leadership represented to their ambitions. "He won't come alone," Elena said, though uncertainty colored her voice, despite her attempt at confidence. "Perhaps not," Vittoria replied, "but even with reinforcements, Damiano's body has not fully recovered from months of recovery. He will not be at his full strength, and Castellan's people have been preparing for this opportunity for weeks." Vittoria left the room shortly after, leaving Elena alone with her fear and the growing certainty that everything she had built with Damiano, the fragile hope they had constructed together over the past several weeks, was about to be tested in the most dangerous way imaginable. Damiano arrived at the warehouse district less than an hour later, accompanied by Salvatore and a small group of trusted men, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood exactly the kind of danger they were walking into. His body ached with exertion, his recovery far from complete, but adrenaline and desperate determination pushed him forward regardless of his physical limitations. The building where Salvatore's tracking had led them stood silent and imposing against the darkening evening sky, its exterior giving no obvious indication of the danger waiting within. Damiano signaled for his men to spread out, approaching the structure with careful, coordinated movements honed through years of navigating dangerous situations within the family's business. Inside, Castellan's men waited in careful positions, having anticipated Damiano's arrival and prepared accordingly. The confrontation that followed unfolded with brutal, chaotic speed, shouts and sudden movement filling the warehouse as both sides clashed in the dim, industrial space. Damiano pushed forward through the chaos, his singular focus on finding Elena, ignoring the danger surrounding him with a desperation that overrode any instinct for self-preservation. He found the room where she was being held, just as one of Castellan's men moved toward her with clear, malicious intent, and something primal and protective surged through him, giving him strength his still recovering body should not have possessed. The confrontation that followed was brief but intense, Damiano's years of experience and desperate determination allowing him to neutralize the immediate threat despite his physical limitations. He rushed to Elena's side, quickly working to free her from the restraints binding her to the chair, his hands trembling with adrenaline and lingering fear. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, checking her carefully for any signs of injury. "I'm okay," Elena said, though her voice shook with the aftermath of terror. "Damiano, this was a trap. Vittoria and Castellan, they planned this together. They wanted you to come here." Understanding dawned in Damiano's eyes, quickly replaced by cold, focused anger. Before he could respond further, Salvatore appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Damiano, we need to move. Castellan's people are regrouping, and there are more of them than we initially anticipated. This entire situation was a setup. Together, they moved quickly through the warehouse, Damiano keeping Elena close and protected as they navigated back toward the exit through the ongoing chaos of the confrontation between their forces and Castellan's men. The fighting had grown more intense, both sides sustaining injuries as the battle for control continued unfolding around them. As they finally reached the exit, emerging into the cool evening air, Damiano caught sight of Vittoria standing near a car parked at a safe distance from the warehouse, watching the unfolding chaos with an expression that mixed satisfaction with growing uncertainty as the operation clearly began falling apart around her carefully constructed plan. "This isn't over," Damiano called out to her, his voice carrying across the distance with unmistakable authority despite his exhaustion. "You made your choice, Vittoria. Now you will face the consequences of it." Vittoria's composure finally cracked, fear replacing the calculated confidence she had carried throughout the operation, as she realized the full scope of what she had set into motion and the reality that it had failed to achieve its intended purpose. The days following the warehouse confrontation moved quickly, each hour bringing new revelations that reshaped the balance of power within the Rossi family's world. Salvatore's men had captured 2 of Castellan's operatives during the chaotic retreat from the warehouse, and the information gathered from careful questioning confirmed everything Elena had already revealed about the alliance between Vittoria and their rival organization. Damiano called an emergency meeting of the family's senior members, gathering them within the private study of the Rossi estate, a room that had witnessed countless important decisions throughout the family's long history. Contessa Rossi sat near the head of the table, her expression carefully neutral despite the obvious tension radiating from her son as he prepared to address everyone gathered. "Vittoria conspired with Castellan to have Elena kidnapped," Damiano began, his voice carrying the cold authority of a man who had fully reclaimed his position as leader of the family. "She used the operation as an opportunity to lure me into a trap designed to eliminate me while I remained distracted and physically vulnerable. This is not a matter of personal disagreement anymore. This is treason against this family." Murmurs spread through the room, several senior members exchanging concerned glances as the full implications settled into understanding. Contessa Rossi's expression finally shifted from careful neutrality into genuine shock, her earlier disapproval of Damiano's relationship with Elena clearly not extending to sanctioning violence or alliance with their most dangerous rival. "I had no knowledge of this," Contessa Rossi said firmly, addressing the room directly. "Whatever concerns I held about my son's personal choices, I would never condone conspiracy with Castellan's organization. This is beyond anything I authorized or intended." "I believe you," Damiano said, turning to face his mother directly. "But your initial decision to erase Elena from my life created the exact vulnerability that Vittoria exploited. Your actions, however well-intentioned, opened a door that nearly cost me everything." Contessa Rossi's composure wavered slightly under the weight of her son's words, the recognition of her own role in setting these dangerous events into motion settling heavily upon her. "You are right," she finally admitted, her voice quieter than usual. "I made a decision I believed would protect this family, and instead, I created a wound that nearly destroyed it entirely." The engagement between Damiano and Vittoria was formally dissolved that same day, the Rossi family severing all connections with Vittoria's family in response to her betrayal. Vittoria herself disappeared from the city shortly after, understanding that remaining within reach of the Rossi family's retribution would be far too dangerous given the severity of her actions. Castellan's organization, weakened by the failed operation and the loss of several key operatives during the warehouse confrontation, found itself vulnerable to the swift, decisive response Damiano orchestrated in the following weeks. Working closely with Enzo and Salvatore, he systematically dismantled the territorial gains Castellan had made during his months of unconsciousness, reclaiming the family's dominant position within the city's underworld through a combination of careful strategy and unwavering determination. Throughout this period of intense business dealings and family restructuring, Elena remained close to Damiano's side, her pregnancy now visible enough that hiding it from the wider family became impossible. Rather than facing the rejection she had once feared, she found herself welcomed with a mixture of curiosity and cautious warmth from family members who had witnessed firsthand the depth of Damiano's determination to protect her. Contessa Rossi, humbled by her role in the near catastrophe that had unfolded, made a deliberate effort to build a genuine relationship with Elena in the weeks that followed. It was not an easy transition for either woman, years of careful family politics and initial rejection, creating a foundation that required patience and honest conversation to rebuild. But slowly, cautiously, something resembling mutual respect began to grow between them. "I was wrong about you," Contessa Rossi said during one particularly honest conversation, held in the quiet privacy of the estate's garden as Elena's pregnancy continued to progress. "I judged you based on standing and connections that ultimately meant nothing compared to what truly mattered. You kept my son alive when everyone else had begun losing hope. That deserves more respect than I initially offered." Elena accepted the apology with grace, understanding the complicated position Contessa Rossi had occupied throughout this entire situation, torn between protecting her family's interests and recognizing the genuine value of a connection she had once dismissed too quickly. 6 weeks after the warehouse confrontation, with Castellan's organization significantly weakened and Vittoria's betrayal fully exposed and addressed, Damiano gathered the entire family together for an announcement that would formally establish Elena's place within their world. Standing before assembled family members, business associates, and trusted allies, Damiano took Elena's hand, addressing the room with the same quiet certainty that had defined his recovery from the very moment he opened his eyes and spoke her name. 8 months ago, I nearly died in a warehouse not far from here, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. The woman standing beside me fought harder than anyone to keep me alive, staying by my side through months of uncertainty when doctors offered little hope that I would ever wake again. When I finally did open my eyes, her name was the first word I spoke, before I understood where I was, before I remembered anything else about my life. That was not confusion. That was truth. He turned to look directly at Elena, his expression carrying open vulnerability rarely displayed before family and associates who expected strength and control above all else. Elena Marchetti is not simply someone who cared for me during my recovery. She is the woman I love, the mother of my child, and the person who reminded me what actually matters in this life, when everything else felt uncertain. I am not asking for this family's permission to build a future with her. I am informing you that this future has already begun, and I expect every one of you to treat her with the respect and protection she deserves as part of this family. The room remained silent for a long moment before Salvatore, standing near the front of the gathered crowd, began to applaud, quickly followed by others throughout the room until the space filled with genuine acknowledgement of the announcement. Contessa Rossi, standing near her son, allowed herself a small, genuine smile, finally releasing the last of her reservations about the path Damiano had chosen. Elena, overwhelmed by the public declaration and the acceptance following it, felt tears sliding down her cheeks, not from fear or uncertainty this time, but from relief and genuine happiness at finally being able to claim, openly and without hesitation, the life she had once believed impossible to have. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down and guests began departing, Damiano found a quiet moment alone with Elena in the estate's garden, the same location where his mother had begun rebuilding her relationship with the woman she had once tried to erase from her son's life entirely. "Are you happy?" Damiano asked softly, his hand resting gently against the curve of Elena's stomach, where their child continued growing steadily toward the world they were building together. "I am," Elena replied, leaning into his embrace with a contentment she had not allowed herself to fully feel in months. "I never imagined this outcome, not during those long nights sitting beside your hospital bed, not during the months I spent hiding, believing I would never see you again. But somehow, despite everything that tried to keep us apart, we found our way back to each other." "We did," Damiano agreed, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead. "And nothing will ever separate us again. Not my family's expectations, not our enemies' schemes, not anything this world tries to place between us. You saved my life the first time, without ever knowing whether I would wake to thank you for it. Now it is my turn to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing to stay." As the sun began setting over the Rossi estate, casting warm golden light across the garden where their future together had finally found solid ground, Damiano and Elena stood together, no longer hiding, no longer running, finally free to build the life that had begun, unexpectedly and irreversibly, the moment his eyes opened and her name became the first word he spoke after 8 months of silence. 3 months later, the Rossi estate had settled into a rhythm neither Damiano nor Elena could have imagined during those uncertain days following the warehouse confrontation. The nursery, once an unused guest room on the estate's second floor, had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space filled with soft colors and careful preparations for the arrival that grew closer with each passing week. Elena had moved into the estate permanently at Damiano's insistence, the security and support of the family compound offering protection that her small apartment across the city never could have matched. The transition had not been without its challenges. Adjusting to a world of guards, careful protocols, and constant awareness of danger required an adjustment period that tested Elena's patience and resilience in ways her previous quiet life never had. But she had also found unexpected comfort within this new world, particularly in her continued relationship with Contessa Rossi, who had become, against all early expectations, one of Elena's most consistent sources of support throughout the final months of her pregnancy. The two women spent afternoons together in the estate's garden, Contessa Rossi sharing stories of Damiano's own childhood, offering guidance drawn from her own experience, navigating the complicated position of raising a family within their dangerous world. Castellan's organization, significantly weakened by the failed operation and Damiano's decisive response in its aftermath, had retreated into a cautious defensive posture, no longer posing the immediate threat it once had. Damiano remained watchful, understanding that true peace within their world was rarely permanent. But the immediate danger that had once threatened everything he was building with Elena had substantially diminished. Vittoria's whereabouts remained unknown, her family's alliance with the Rossis permanently severed, her name rarely spoken within the estate except as a quiet reminder of how quickly betrayal could unravel, even the most carefully constructed plans. Damiano had chosen not to pursue further retribution against her, understanding that the more valuable victory lay in building the life he now had, rather than dwelling on the danger of what might have been. Salvatore remained a constant, steady presence throughout this period, his loyalty to Damiano never wavering, his protective instincts toward Elena growing genuine and warm, as he witnessed firsthand the transformation that had unfolded within the family since Damiano's awakening. He often joked, during quiet moments shared with the household staff, that he had gained not just a boss he respected, but something closer to family in the process. On a quiet evening in early spring, as gentle rain fell softly outside the estate's windows, Elena went into labor, the moment both anticipated and feared finally arriving after months of careful preparation. Damiano remained by her side throughout the entire process, his earlier fear of hospitals, born from his own long recovery, giving way entirely to focused determination to support Elena through every difficult moment. Their daughter arrived just past midnight, her cries filling the quiet hospital room with a sound that brought tears to Damiano's eyes. Tears he made no effort to hide from the small group of family members waiting anxiously nearby. Contessa Rossi was among the first to hold her granddaughter, her earlier reservations about Elena completely dissolved beneath the overwhelming joy of welcoming new life into their family. They named her Sofia, a name Elena had chosen months earlier during quiet, hopeful conversations about the future she and Damiano were slowly building together. Watching Damiano hold his daughter for the first time, his usual composed strength replaced entirely by open, unguarded tenderness, Elena felt a certainty settle over her that she had once believed impossible during those frightening months of hiding and uncertainty. Whatever dangers remained within their world, whatever challenges still waited in their future, they would face them together, bound not just by the love that had somehow survived 8 months of separation and silence, but by the family they had built despite every obstacle placed before them. In the weeks following Sofia's birth, Damiano found himself approaching his role within the family with renewed perspective, understanding more clearly than ever the weight of legacy and protection that came with leadership. He worked to strengthen alliances that would ensure a safer future for his daughter, careful to balance the demands of his world with the genuine desire to be present for the family he had nearly lost the chance to build. Elena, watching him hold Sofia during quiet evenings in the nursery, often found herself reflecting on the strange, difficult path that had brought them to this moment. From a hospital room filled with uncertainty and fear, through months of hidden longing and forced separation, through danger and betrayal that had nearly cost them everything, to this quiet, golden evening where their small family sat together, safe and whole. "Do you ever think about that first day?" she asked him one evening, watching him gently rock Sofia to sleep. "When you first opened your eyes and said my name." Damiano looked up at her, his expression soft with the memory. "Every day. I did not understand it then, why your name was the first thing my mind reached for after so much darkness. But I understand it now. Somewhere, even unconscious, even lost within 8 months of silence, some part of me already knew that you were the person worth fighting to return to." Elena moved to sit beside him, resting her head gently against his shoulder as they both looked down at their sleeping daughter, the quiet peace of the moment carrying the weight of everything they had overcome to reach it. Outside, the rain continued falling softly against the estate's windows, a gentle, steady rhythm that felt fitting for a story that had begun in chaos and fear, but had finally, after everything, found its way toward quiet, hopeful peace. Damiano Rossi had woken from a coma that nearly claimed his life, calling out for a woman his own family had tried to erase from his memory. In the months that followed, against betrayal, danger, and every obstacle placed before them, he had proven that some connections were simply too strong to be broken, no matter how hard the world tried to tear them apart. And now, holding his daughter close while the woman he loved rested peacefully beside him, Damiano understood, with complete and unwavering certainty, that everything he had fought for since that first fragile breath of consciousness had been worth every moment of the struggle.